Thank you. Good evening. Is everybody here? We're supposed to be here? My name is Gabriel Eichler. I'm the chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Václav Havel Library. And I'll also welcome my colleague here, David Dušek, who is a member of the Board of Trustees. I was going to welcome a number of other ambassadors and deputy ambassadors, but they didn't show up. So I'm not going to welcome them. Tough. It is a pleasure to see so many people here. This is a new series that Sabina has organized for the Václav Havel Library. This is named Conversation With, and we have the pleasure to actually welcome the British ambassador, Mr. Matt Field, the ambassador of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. And we do have an ambassador coming here from Cyprus. Well, welcome. And that's all I'm going to do, and give the floor to Tereza Willoughby, who is going to moderate this, and we appreciate the fact that she does that.
So, thank you very much. Hello, everybody, again. Thank you for coming. Thanks a lot for being our guest, Mr. Field. Let's start straight from here. There will be, of course, some space for your questions, from the audience. But first, you are not new here in this country anymore, but I am interested, have you been to Prague before becoming appointed ambassador?
Thank you, and what a pleasure it is. A slightly intimidating full room of people to entertain, but particularly glad to have the invitation to this wonderful place and legacy, of course, of Václav Havel. Your question, had I been to Prague before I came as ambassador? Yes, like many Brits, I'd come with a small group of my male friends on a cultural expedition.
And what do you remember from that cultural expedition, Mr. Field?
Not much, if I'm really honest. No, but I had, and then I came back as an adult a little time after, but knew enough certainly that I was incredibly excited at the opportunity to come and work here. What was your family's reaction to when you got the posting? Yeah, so I mean, my wife Martina and I, this is always a team sport. This is a joint decision when we want to try to get somewhere, and we're both incredibly excited at the idea of trying to come to Prague. Of course, it's a popular job. Most people have realised what an amazing place this is. So to get the job, to have the opportunity to come here, we were very excited. I've got to say, our boys have settled in here incredibly quickly. They're 10 and 13, and it's again a brilliant place for young kids and for families as well. So, it's one of those rare places, I think, that genuinely lives up to the hype. So, it's been even better to be here than we had hoped. To go back a little bit in time, what led you to diplomacy in the first place? Accidents. Probably more than anything else. I think if you kind of look back on certainly the early parts of my CV, I have a degree in theology and religious studies. I have a master's in Japanese studies. That probably tells you that I have trouble concentrating for very long periods of time. So I've lived in Kenya, I'd lived in Sweden, I'd lived in Japan, and then as I was trying to find my way, I ended up working at Oxfam, which is this incredible international charity that does fantastic work. And I was looking really for something that combined this enjoyment of not traveling so much as actually living and working somewhere. So immersing yourself in a place, not just living out of a suitcase. And actually, diplomacy is one of those rare things that allows you to do that. And it was a complete, no one in my family had done anything like this before. No one in my family had stayed in school past 16 even. So it was a big change for us. And the idea that someone like me could do that was kind of mind-blowing. And then we tried, we got in, and it's been an amazing, amazing journey since.
How was it when somebody called you for the first time, Your Excellency?
Pretty much the same way it is now, which is it's still a shock. It still sounds like a mistake, but I will try to get used to it. Certainly, my kids won't use it for me, which I'm working on.
How did you prepare for a posting in a new country? Did you have to do some kind of homework before coming?
Yeah, so I think there's an amazing moment in the career of a diplomat where you find out where you're going next, and certainly in our system it's somewhere that you've applied for, it's somewhere that you've asked to be sent, and so you have this fantastic bit of news, and then you have a kind of a terrifying moment of realization that, oh my God, now I'm going to have to learn Czech. Now I'm going to have to try to earn this responsibility, this privilege of representing my country. And so, very quickly, I throw myself into, reading, watching, generally trying to learn the language as well. And this is that process of starting to immerse yourself, starting to get to know the place, which continues. If there's one sort of common feature of the good diplomats that I know, the good people who have done jobs like mine, it's curiosity. And I think if you do have that curiosity, it takes you a long way.
You are here for over a year. What have been some of the most memorable experiences here?
Oof,
Many of them.
So there's been quite a few. I think, so I arrived just in the middle of the presidential election campaign, which was a wonderful immersion straight into Czech politics. And then I presented my credentials, but I presented my credentials to the outgoing president, Mr. Zeman. And I'm not sure, well, it was a short conversation, which didn't really suggest that he's a big fan of the UK, but it was great to have at least a brief opportunity, and then to see that sort of transition across, and then into the sort of Petr Pavel time that we have now. I think the coronation was an amazing moment as well, and it felt quite strange. So because we'd been through this generational change with the sad death of the Queen, which I know many Czechs sort of expressed very strongly, and their sense of loss and their sense of sort of kinship with us over that. And then we had this moment of coronation and renewal and sort of a new start. And of course, none of us, very few of us, were around in the 1950s, so we hadn't been through this before. We didn't really know what to expect. But then for those Brits that were overseas, we were not quite part of the story at home. So maybe it felt as though we might be missing out in some way in an important moment. But actually, my experience of the coronation here was probably at least as intense as anything that I would have got in the UK. So I got up at 6 o'clock that morning for my first interview. We had TV crews in the residence all day. We had a brilliant event where we decided, rather than doing sort of a closed private celebration, that we would do something public. We would take the coronation party to a shopping centre, which is a little bit of a departure, maybe not what people expected, but it meant that we could have literally thousands of people participating. British food, British music, British fashion, and that was a pretty special day. But it was special because we were able to celebrate it with our friends here.
The fact that you are so open and you are very often appearing in media, it makes you very popular here. But is there anything you might have done differently from your point of view?
Yeah, so I mean, you definitely make mistakes in a job like this, and I think the point about sort of media appearances, of course, that's part of the job. The ambassadors have always been doing public diplomacy. We've always been doing interviews or whatever the channels of the day are. The only thing that's changed with social media is the tools, so the way that we do it has changed a bit, but the fundamentals are exactly the same. I think I look back on much more on the things that have gone well, so that sort of first day video that we did, that, you know, I wanted to make a start where I actually got on the 22 tram just around the corner from here, took it all the way up to Malostranska, went in, said what I thought, you know, the relationship was about, that I was excited, again, that sense of curiosity, hopefully. Mentioned a few of the greats, Havel, Horakova, Zimmermann. You know, I pressed the buttons in the hope that it would work, and actually the response was incredibly positive. So it's been a warm welcome. It's much easier to remember those sort of positive bits of the first year than any of the mistakes, although I've definitely made them.
Have you actually visited the theatre of Jara Zimmermann, if you are mentioning it?
I have. I've seen some of Zimmermann in English, actually, which is, I have to say, translates extremely well. Extremely well. So
it's hard to translate, I must say.
It is, but I think you have the sense of you know, the sense of humour, and this is another part we can maybe touch on as well. I feel like Brits and Czechs have a very common sense of humour.
Really?
And it makes it translate very easily. So I've said it before, but I think, you know, Zimmermann could be a British character. Monty Python could be Czech. This is the same kind of common ground that I think we have, which means that it works very well. That sense of ridiculousness that links us.
So Czech humor works for you, because very often foreigners are not so, let's say, keen to understand it. So you get it all the time?
No, I think it works. I think it definitely works, and I think you can make jokes, you know, about Jara Zimmermann in English that still work. I mean, it doesn't mean you catch everything, of course, and you know, if you watch, you know, if you watch a Czech comedy, you will probably not get everything, but you can get a lot, and I think that's the. We don't like people who take themselves too seriously, and I think this is actually comes back to a Havel line as well, that people who take themselves too seriously can always become ridiculous, and I think that is something that we share as well.
Now we are here in Prague, but you have been also in many Czech regions. Why did you go there in the first place?
So I understand the question. It's a question that actually quite often, so I will say, for example, and today I'm going to Brno, and then a number of comments from people in Prague saying, why?
That's mean, that's mean.
Yeah, so I understand the question, but of course the reality is that I'm not the ambassador to Prague. I'm the ambassador to the Czech Republic, and everywhere it's easy to get stuck in a capital city, and it's easy to get stuck thinking that's the sum total of the experience, and you can see everything, but you can't, and you have to try to get out and travel around and see a bit more of the country. So in the first year I managed to get to all 14 regions. Which was a goal, but that's just a first visit, and so you know, you have to build on that and find ways of learning and understanding some of those differences that you get as you travel around. What
did you learn there? Is there something you are now using during your job or during everyday life here? So you know, the kind of flip side of what I just said, you know, people will, then I'm in Brno and say, well, I'm going back to Prague, and they'll say, why? I mean, so there's the kind of typical sense also that the capital city is a bit cut off, it's a bit different, that actually it's more real around the rest of the country. But I think that's the same for all of us. You get that in the UK as well. I think that sense of the kind of different identity and cultural traditions that you find in different parts of the country as well, you get a real appreciation for how important it is where someone comes from. And what that means now. They might not have stayed there, but it's where they come from, and that sort of attachment to home is still really, really important, I think, and that's what I keep finding. This personal approach is great, but obviously you also reach a lot of people in the Czech Republic through social media. How big part of your job is that?
So it's there's a line I've said a couple of times. It's a bit trite, but you know, ambassadors were the first influencers. So you know, we've always been trying to influence people. We've always been trying to have our way through public diplomacy and the other tools of the job that you have. All that's really changed with social media is, I think it allows a two-way conversation more easily. So it's the social bit of social media. That means you can actually interact sometimes with a different audience. It's not just project, but you can actually hear back. That can be great. That can be pretty tough as well, because it's not always the positives, of course. You know, that's the nature of a conversation, of two-way communication, is that it can be negative. So there's an awful lot of other feedback that I get as well through the social media channels. In terms of what I do, you know, it might only be 10-15% of my time, but it's the most visible 10-15% of my time, and for that reason it's important to get it right.
Did you get some special training for that? You know, speaking about response to certain comments, discussion.
So I think I've learned most of all by doing. So especially by being ambassador in Bosnia prior to this, and certainly making lots of mistakes there. But also having a look at some of my other colleagues, some ambassadors who have, I think, made very good use of it, that are trying to, you know, get the right balance. So you're always trying to get a balance between, you want it to be authentic and you want it to be engaging in some way, but it also, we're doing it for a reason, we're doing it for a purpose. You know, my job is not to be an entertainer, it's to be the representative of the UK. And to champion and work on this fantastic relationship we have. So you're always trying to do things for a reason, and if you do that, then I think most of the time you get it right. But it's, you know, every day is a learning process in this.
I guess you are doing something right, because also your social media team won a lot of prizes for their job, especially for the campaign Sem tu novej.
Well, that tells you they're doing something right. I mean, whether I'm doing something right, I'm not sure, but definitely the team is doing a brilliant job. No, they've. It's interesting. Again, when we talked right at the start of my time, or even before I began as ambassador, I wanted to communicate a sense of that curiosity and openness, but also that I wasn't starting from completely zero. I was, you know, I had worked to understand the country. I'd be coming in, listening and enthusiastic, and then it was a colleague in the embassy that came up with this phrase "Sem tu novej," and it's very hard to work out exactly why that has been so successful, but I think it's because of the Czech response. That's what's made it work. If it hadn't been for that very positive response, then it wouldn't have lasted a day. So it's the response that makes the campaign work.
Is it true that now your team is advising to other British ambassadors in other countries?
Well, they definitely get lots of questions from our other embassies around the world, and so they are in demand. But it is, you know, one of the things about being an ambassador, of course, is I might be the most visible bit, but I'm only one out of, in our case, about 60 staff. You know, and most of that staff is Czech. So when we say the British Embassy, you tend to think of the most visible part, but of course there's a team that works within the embassy on defence section, political, trade, drunk Brits. You know, there's a whole team that's used to dealing with those. But you have, you know, an organisation, a team that is working together in a common purpose, and then I tend to be the most visible bit.
You also in the past you asked online for some recommendation for Czech books and films, and you already mentioned, of course, Václav Havel. You mentioned Jara Zimmerman, but is there something you enjoy the most of the Czech culture, Czech art?
Yeah, so and this is again when I talk about that warm welcome. I would ask a question like, okay, so what books should I read? What Czech writers should I read? And I get, you know, literally hundreds and hundreds of recommendations. I would ask about great films to watch, and people like Jan Hřebejk would send me a list, and of course you listen to someone like that. Interestingly, he didn't recommend his own films, but other people recommended his films to me. So you get that, you get songs, what sort of other cultural influences. That receptiveness, I think, to the question was great. So, I mean, it's hard to pick favourites, but Pelishki is, I think, the best thing that you could... it translates very well with the subtitles because it gives you a real sense of what the country was like in that moment. I'm reading the books of Karel Čapek a lot. It doesn't feel like it was written in the 1930s. It feels like it was written about 5 minutes ago, most of it. So, incredibly relevant today. And there's great contemporary writers as well. I was reading recently Bianca Belova, her book Jezero, The Lake. And that's another fantastic, piece of writing. So, the pile of books next to my bed doesn't ever seem to go down. It just seems to go up. But the enthusiasm with which people have been giving me recommendations has been great.
May I ask you, in what language do you read these books? Because you're willing to speak the language and to teach, to learn the language is big. So are you already able to read a little bit in a Czech language?
Yeah, so I can read a bit. It's going to take me a lot longer in Czech, so I have to kind of choose most of my reading in translation. But it was another of those objectives that I set at the start. I feel if I'm going to represent the UK here and I'm going to understand this country, I can't do it only through English. I think there's something about making the effort, even in a language as difficult as Czech. There's something about making the effort to try to pick up some of the language. And so through the course of that first year, lots of lessons, lots of banging my head against grammar books and things like that, and then trying to do more and more. And then my sort of high ambition target for the end of the year was, which I did, was I went on to the Jan Kraus show and did a whole interview in Czech, which was quite terrifying. For reasons I think everyone understands why that would be. That was a high ambition goal.
And how soon after arriving you start to be a bit confident in the language?
I'm not sure I am still confident. It's still really tough. But I think Czechs generally are very appreciative of the effort. Yeah. I think most people understand that it's not the easiest language in the world. So if you make the effort, it's always been kind of appreciated, and then the further you get, the more appreciation you have. And there is still, I'm still trying to get my head around and sort of mouth around the pronunciation, which is the most difficult thing. But that's part of the fun of doing the job as well.
Was it helpful for you in the learning process that you have been Serbia and that your wife is from ex-Yugoslavia?
I thought it would help more than it has, if I'm totally honest. So, you can sit on a beach in Croatia, you can hear Czech, definitely. And I thought, okay, this should help. This should help quite a bit. Actually, Croatian has not helped as much as I'd hoped. And some things, actually, it's really making it worse. So some things just mean the complete opposite. Mm-hmm. So if I tell you if I say something is úžasný here, great. But in Croatia, it is the absolute worst. So úžasní lidé are the worst people. And there's still something that I find it quite difficult to pick up that change. So, the complications and the different pronunciation things as well. But again, this is the fun of the job.
People are appreciating that you are using the language, that you are trying. You also mentioned the fact that Czech people generally like British culture. Does this make your job a bit easier?
Yeah, I think so. I think it gives us a head start. So, there's a couple of things. One, of course, is, I'm learning Czech, but the fact is that English is extremely well and widely spoken. So, that's a big advantage in itself. So, our ability to work in our native language because it's so widely spoken here. I think the head start comes from a long history of the UK and Czechoslovakia, then Czech Republic, sort of a shared history that you're building on top of. So you think about Thomas Garrigue-Masaryk's relationship with the UK. You think about the government in exile during the Second World War, the 2,500 Czechs and Slovaks who flew with the RAF, all of those legacies. You think about the underground university during the communist era, Roger Scruton and all of those guys who were, determinedly supporting people here. Then you think about the relationship, say, between Havel and Prince Charles, now King Charles, Prince Charles at the time, the restoration projects, all of this sort of thick relationship that you're building on top of, and then you have all of the cultural connections as well. So, this is a great advantage for us, and that gives us, I think, certainly a head start.
We are very often speaking about these kind of common points in our history. So there was a great opportunity a few days ago when the new film about Nicholas Winton had a premiere here. So these things we know, but is there also some kind of conflicts between two cultures you need to kind of sort out, or are difficult for you doing the job?
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned the Nicholas Winton story, actually, because, I mean, again, you talk about amazing privileges in this job. I think one of them absolutely was delivering a letter from King Charles to General Emil Boček to say thank you and happy 100th birthday, which was an amazing moment.
It was lovely.
Then I'm sat next to Milena Grenfell-Baines and her sister Eva, whose story is being told up on the screen, and of course it's their story as much as it's Nicholas Winton's story. He himself always said that there were many others who contributed, and of course the children themselves were remarkable. So,
very touching. Yeah.
So you do have that sort of amazing history that you're building on, but I mean generally the relationship is very good. I think the challenge is that when the relationship is easy, you sometimes take it for granted. And actually, it's making sure that we don't take each other for granted, that we continue to do things together, and that we find opportunities. We're not in the EU anymore, so we don't see each other in that format. We're still in NATO. We still have hundreds of reasons to cooperate, but we have to work on it a bit. And I think it's that risk of taking someone for granted that's the biggest risk.
Your embassy must inform your bosses about what's happening here regularly, of course. What are these events they are interested in? Yeah,
so I think London has been very interested, especially over the last couple of years, because of, not least because of Ukraine. I mean, this is still for me one of those defining moments that the Czech Republic and the UK reacted, I think, faster, clearer, more strongly than anyone else, pretty much. I think we did that because we understood more quickly than others what was at stake, because we'd had the domestic experience of Russian reckless aggression, Vrbětice or Salisbury in our case, but many other incidents. And so we responded very quickly and very clearly to that, and I think London has continued to appreciate and work, wanted us to work closely together. We also have lots of cooperation on other international policy challenges. What does China mean for us all? The new technologies, all of these kind of other areas. We still do quite a lot of trade together. We want to get that even bigger, and then you have all of these cultural connections between the two. And it honestly feels as though the Czechs are taking over in London, certainly in terms of our cultural, running our opera houses, our orchestras. These Czechs are right there, buying our football clubs. These are big things for us, but it's a relationship that is in good shape.
And how much freedom do you have from your bosses in terms of what you do here?
I always listen very carefully to their instructions, and then I do pretty much what I want to do. But the reason I can do that is because we're starting from such a good point. I mean, this is not a difficult relationship. This is what more can we do together relationship. And when it's that kind of relationship, when you've got a great team in the embassy and you've got great partners on the Czech side as well, in the ministries, in business here, cultural institutions, civil society. You've got amazing people to work with. So that makes my life very easy.
I assume that, for example, it's quite natural, normal that you, for example, take part of the Pride Parade or events like that. But how much do you need to consult this?
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting one. So I was really pleased early on in my time here to have the opportunity to participate in Pride here with the whole embassy team. We support equal marriage as an agenda here, but that's not a personal agenda for me. That's UK government policy. We support equal marriage around the world. So people, I think, tend to maybe sometimes personalise a little bit the agenda. It is something personally I care about, but it's also UK government policy. And so you're getting to do both of those things at the same time. Because ultimately I'm still representing the UK here. But certainly I don't need permission to do those because those are government priorities already.
So on the kind of lighter side, for example, now when the popular series The Crown was appeared, you also did an interview for certain tabloids and stuff like that. Do you need a permission to do something like that? Or why do you do it?
Why are you going to Prague? So I think the great, something like The Crown is a perfect example. Yeah, it is an amazing cultural institution. Yeah, it's incredibly popular all around the world. It's the kind of thing that if the government was making it themselves would never have been popular. Because it's precisely because it's the unofficial, dramatized, fictionalized version of events that it is popular, that it does so well. But that's UK soft power. We don't control it. We should be celebrating it. Even if we don't agree with everything that's in it, we can still talk about it and enjoy the fact that people are watching it and getting a lot out of it. So, sometimes my job, I think, is to be a cheerleader for things that are good. That includes Czech things going into the UK as well. So sometimes we're celebrating what Czechs have achieved in the UK as much as what Brits have achieved here. And that's the great thing about the job.
We are speaking here about different parts of your job. So now one maybe a bit hard question. What makes a good diplomat?
Oof. If I find out, I'll let you know. But I think it's... When I started in my career, I probably would have had a very fixed idea of what a diplomat should look like, and it would have been a little bit old-fashioned, and it probably would have sounded quite posh, and it would have been completely out of touch. I think when I've seen great diplomats in my own service or others around the world, and you have some fantastic diplomats in the Czech service as well, it's people who are able to connect. Curiosity and sort of enthusiasm definitely helps, but it's the ability to connect and understand. So empathy, but also I think it has to be rooted on, and I'm thinking also not least of where we are right now, but it has to be rooted on values as well. We're not meant to be neutral, we're meant to be objective. And I think that's an important distinction as well. We're meant to be objective. We're meant to be objective in the way that we work with our partners and friends, in the way that we stand up to aggression, or when those same values are broken. You have to do both of those things, and I think for that reason, a lot of it comes down to your ability to connect.
Maybe now let's take some questions from the audience.
Yeah, please.
Is here anybody who has a question for Mr. Ambassador? Just please wait for a microphone. No question here. Ah, there is a question. There is another one.
One simple question. How much do you enjoy this beautiful city? And what do you know about its development?
That's a great question. So, how much do I enjoy it? Genuinely one of the most amazing places to live. And that's an easy thing to say, but it helps that it's true. I think this is a city that wears its history, but it doesn't wear it too heavily, actually. And so it still feels as though a city that is not living in the past. It doesn't feel like a museum, but it feels like it's alive. And I think the more time that we spend here, especially as a family, and the more that we sort of get to travel around, the more that we enjoy it, genuinely. I think it has one of the most amazing public transport systems, and that sounds like a small thing, but it's not really not, because it connects the whole city together for you. So suddenly, if you're stood at Narodní třída, things don't feel that far away because you know you can get there. Whether you want to spend time, we love Stromovka, the park. We love Petržin. I'm practicing all my ursh now. So you have these amazing sort of green spaces within the city. You also have great variety of the sort of the restaurants, the cultural life as well. I'm thinking of like Sapa. You genuinely think you're in Hanoi for a couple of hours, but you also have this history of your ability to spend time in the National Theatre or in the other places. So I love the question because I can just keep, as you can tell, I can keep going for a long time about this, and I probably should stop. But I think it's a very special place, and sometimes it's easier for a guest to see that than someone who's been here all along.
I would even say, even I like London very much, that it's maybe easier to live here in Prague, not just because of size. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's an incredibly livable place. I mean, that's the right word, I think. I think you're right.
Do we have any other questions? A lot of them, so please.
Hello, thank you for coming. One brief question. Right next to your door at the embassy is the famous pub, quite unpopular at a certain moment in certain circles, called Uhrocha. It's famous for being very unpleasant for anybody who is considered to be a foreigner. Not foreigner from the point of the view of speaking different language, but living somewhere else. They even don't like the members of the parliament for whom that restaurant is the closest one. So, one question, have you ever been there and have you enjoyed, or have you been kicked out by Václav as everybody else? Thank you.
So, I'll tell you two experiences in Uhrocha. The first one was, I had a friend visiting and we went out and we were out for a while in the evening and we were coming back, and of course you walk past Uhrocha on the way up to my place. So we said, okay, we'll just stop for a quick one. And there was a bit of space and we came and we sat down and we got our piece of paper and we got the 2 scratches on the paper. And then, because this was the end of the evening, and then I went to pay and he took the 2 pieces of the 2 lines and he looked at me with such disappointment. What was even the point? What was the point? So that was my first experience. And then another time that I went there, and I think by that point we'd be kind of, if not quite locals, at least we were recognized as people that lived nearby. And I wouldn't say the service was friendly, but it was a little bit less rude. And that felt like such an achievement. I was so pleased. Exactly. I think that is as good as it's going to get.
Some other question, please.
I have a cultural question. Actually, you mentioned, you mentioned a couple of things about Brits and Czechs. So I'd like to ask, where do you believe that the Brits, obviously we look up to Brits a lot, but where do you think they can be the biggest inspiration for us? And vice versa, if there is anything that you believe, or what is it that the Brits could learn from Czechs besides their admiration for music and football? Thank you.
Football, please. No, I think it's a really good question. So what do we learn from each other? I think we, rather than sort of specifying one from the Brits and one from the Czechs, I think when the relationship works well, I think we bring out the best in each other. Yeah. So when I see partnerships, cultural, defense, security, political other things, when that works well, one, we understand each other because we have a bit of this common language and this common sense of humor. But also, you probably you help us be a little bit more direct. that brings out, I think, what we need to be a bit more of. So sometimes, you tend to know, not only in Ukroka, but you tend to know when you're in the wrong side. And sometimes the Brits can be very elusive. And what do you think of it? It's quite good. And the Czechs think, oh, it's quite good. But clearly the Brit is saying it's terrible. It is, so it's absolutely terrible. So it helps us be a little bit more direct. And I think where the relationship also works well is it just kind of lifts the heads up a little bit so that we don't only think about our own immediate problems. So we look a bit more broadly. I'm quoting other people, so don't shoot me for this, but I've had the number of Czechs have told me that to understand Czechs, I need to read The Lord of the Rings because Czechs are hobbits. It's a huge number of people have said it to me. I'm not sure if it can be true. I'm telling you, I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying people keep saying it to me.
We have no hairy feet.
Okay, so yeah, I take it back. But I think we can bring out the best of each other, and this is why, there's something wonderful about watching, for example, the Welsh National Orchestra playing Marvelast on the opening day of Prague Spring, because it's exactly that connection and bringing out the best of each other.
Another question, please.
Hello, Ambassador. I was wondering, following the appointment of David Cameron as Foreign Secretary, have your priorities or the way you approach your job changed since then, from going from Mr. Cleverly to Mr. Cameron? And how do you see that appointment impacting your role here in the UK, or here in the Czech Republic moving forward? Thank you.
No, great question. So the first thing I'll say, and I have to be a little bit careful, I've got embassy colleagues that are going to keep an eye on me and tell me if I get myself in trouble. The first thing to say is because, obviously many people were surprised with the appointment. And so the tendency would say, so did you guys know all along that this was coming? We really didn't know. And there's an amazing clip of the BBC when the announcement happens, and we knew there were reshuffles happening that day. And the car pulls up outside number 10, and the BBC is doing the commentary saying, this is what's happening, this is what's happening. And the door opens and David Cameron gets out, and the BBC journalist just goes, that looks like David Cameron. And so no one saw this coming. But in many ways, actually, it's worked brilliantly because it's brought us someone who has immense experience and international reach, who is able still to do the very heavy lifting that we have at the moment, especially in the Middle East and with Ukraine and these other major challenges, and able to do that whilst working with the government. The priorities themselves are still pretty much the same. I mean, they haven't changed fundamentally because it's the same government, and we still have, helping Ukraine succeed. That's the top priority because it keeps all of us safer. So it's been much more continuity than change. All of that said, it was still a bit of a surprise.
Just waiting for a question. Yeah.
I would like to ask about the British-Czech Business Association. It used to be very active. I don't know whether there is change since we are out of the EU, and quite a few British companies either left or reduced their staffing. Could you say something about it and how the embassy supports the association?
Absolutely, delighted to. So the chamber is in fantastic shape right now. So I think you're right. I think it did go through a period when it was a bit quieter, but I think what we've got now is a really excellent group of Czechs and Brits who are really enthusiastically driving the chamber forward. And if any of you is looking for more information, please do just look up British Chamber in the Czech Republic, because they're doing fantastic work connecting companies. We have a lot of companies here, Tesco's, Marks and Spencer's, places like that. But you also have an awful lot that's happening between our property sectors, legal sectors, financial sectors, all sorts of traffic there. My job, and we have a team in the embassy that does this brilliantly, but my job is to kind of just look for the right connections, bit of a dating agency, make sure the right people are talking to each other. And so far it's going pretty well. Last year, trade was up 22%, which is great, but we still want to do more. So I'm glad you asked. I think the chamber is really running really well now, but I'd love to see even more of it if I can.
More questions?
Good evening, sir. My question is, when we came here, we didn't go through any personal checks. There are no bodyguards visible around here, so on. So my question is, have you ever, during your career, have you ever experienced any dangerous situation which would cause the need of personal protection or so?
I wondered where that question was going for a second. It had me. You had me worried for a minute there that this was going to turn into a very direct attack. No, I think it's a really good question, and I think, you know, sometimes I get credit where absolutely no credit is due, because I'll turn up and I don't have a security detail, I don't have the sort of personal protection that say the US ambassador has, but it's really because my government doesn't care that much about me. So there are very few places where British ambassadors have that kind of protection. It is also true that, I mean, this is an incredibly safe city, and, you know, when we weigh up the risks, we judge whether you're coming here as a tourist or you're here as an official visitor or you're here as an ambassador, the risk is very low. All of that said, there is a kind of underlying risk that is true anywhere in the world. And I think, without wishing to, you know, kind of really bring the mood down, I think the events of 21st December here in Prague, terrible, terrible moment, and, you know, we continue to really feel for our Czech friends during a time like that, just shows that there are risks for all of us, and the sort of security challenges that can come either domestically or can cross borders and come to us as well. So, you know, these are real challenges. One of my priorities is, you know, a relationship between the Czechia and the UK that makes us both safer in all senses. And it's not easy, especially for open democratic countries like ours, because I want to be able to be out in public. I want to be able to interact directly with people in the same way that, you know, our members of parliament want to be able to interact directly with people. The challenge is keeping all of those sort of democratic openness values in place when sometimes the challenges are quite serious as well.
To make it a bit lighter again,
thank you.
Did you experience any James Bond moment in your position? Did you have to really run fast? Or?
So I feel like I'm being slightly set up on this because I have already embarrassed myself. So I went to Karlovy Vary and I got very excited because, of course, I recognised the location of Casino Royale. And so I did slightly recreate the shot of him running in front of the hotel, Grand Poop Hotel. So yes, that was my moment. I understand they are looking for a new James Bond. So
do you think it will be a woman?
Well, in the last film, there was a 007 was a woman. So that one is certainly we've kind of cracked that. We'll see. I'm not sure. I'm not sure they'll find a woman that wants to do that particular job.
And who would you like the most in the role, if you are speaking about it here?
That's a really dangerous question.
I know.
I still haven't got past Daniel Craig yet, mentally. So, and it's worth remembering that huge numbers of people thought he was a terrible choice for James Bond. Bond can't be blonde. Bond can't have blue eyes. You know, this kind of, which is clearly, of course, nonsense. But I think the best thing is I hope it's a surprising choice, because that was a surprising choice, and it really worked out.
So another question from the audience? Many.
You never know when this thing comes back, so I have two questions in one go.
Okay.
One is, you said diplomacy used to be a very, very serious business, and we see now an openness unknown before. Do you see that being a trend in the diplomatic service, be it the British or be it the others, because you see the realm of diplomats all over places? That's one. And number two, as you're sitting in the library of Václav Havel, now the monarch, King Charles, whilst being still Prince Charles, has visited Prague and the Czech Republic on a number of occasions, meeting in person President Václav Havel, etc., etc. So I believe he must have developed a soft spot for Czechia and for Prague and the people here. Now, did this play any role in your preparation for your current job, and in which way?
They're great. I'll do the second one first. So one of the amazing moments as an ambassador is the opportunity to meet your boss, and my boss is His Majesty the King. So I got to meet him back in October, and with my wife Martina, we had sort of a 10-15 minute conversation. Now, the easiest thing in the world for me was when I told him where I was going, because he immediately started talking about his relationship with the Havel. He immediately started talking about his visits 5 times that he'd been here. So he was, clearly still very enthusiastic. To which, of course, being a good diplomat, I said, well, I think they'd love it if you came back again. What do you think? And in fact, President Pavel invited you during the coronation, as I'm sure you remember. And so he said he would love to come back, but I would have to convince his bosses, or at least the people that worked around him, that we would be able to make it. So we put in that bid, and we put in an effort to try to get him back here. I don't think he personally would need much convincing. Now, of course, and with thanks to the Václav Havel Library, who have just passed me a very nice message that I will relay to His Majesty. We're all concerned about his health, and he has already scaled back all of his public events. So we wish him the best, and we hope that he will soon be back in full duties and able to come here. On the openness point, I think it's, again, it's a really good question. What I hope is that it's not openness versus seriousness. So I don't think we do openness at the expense of doing serious diplomacy. I think we do both, and I think we do both better if we are more open to the people, in my case, British people that I'm here to represent, but also the Czech people that I'm here to interact with. So I think it's the openness that hopefully will allow us to do the sort of the heavy lifting, the work of making our countries safer and more prosperous. I think that's the way that I would like to see it go. I think you see the tensions that go with that, not least in politics as well. I've said already, social media is a kind of a double-edged tool. I think it can increase cooperation, communication, which is great. I think it can also make it much easier to spread disinformation. I think it can make it much more hostile place sometimes. I think it's really worrying to see the number of, especially women in politics, who are stepping back because of the hostile environment that is created, especially online. I think that makes us all lose. So I hope we can do both of those things without sacrificing exactly that.
More questions?
Yes,
thank you.
I have a historic question. What is your view on British mandate of Palestine? And I wonder if there is any wisdom or lesson to be learned during those 28 years, which could help us to understand better the situations which we are facing now there.
Wow, that is quite the question. I think it's a very good question. I don't think I would be the best person to answer about the mandate specifically, but one thing that really strikes me. So my first job in the Foreign Office was on the Israel desk, and it was an amazing sort of privilege and opportunity to understand this historic relationship that we have in all its challenges. As I go back and reread some of the books that I read at the time, and I've been doing that a lot recently, I'm struck at how many of the same problems we seem to be going around again and again and again. The same territory, the same issues, the same challenges of Israel's right to live securely, which is absolutely it has, but also the need to find ways to develop safe and secure future for the Palestinians, and I don't think any of that has fundamentally changed. I have no solutions, I have no wisdom to share on that, except to say that the UK continues to be absolutely committed to both of those things. And I think it's a tragedy to see what happened on October 7th, to see the sort of naked hostility towards men, women and children And it's also a tragedy to see how it's playing out today, which will not leave Israel safer either. And I think that we say that as friends of Israel.
Thank you for this. After this light question, I will make something extremely serious. You mentioned that your company, actually the British company, Marks & Spencer, is still active on the territory. And I have a really crucial question for me. Why Marmite is not more imported to Czech Republic?
So, thank you. Thank you. Finally, the question I've been looking for. One of the sort of proudest moments was when my kids started eating Marmite. One of the great tragedies was when my kids started eating Marmite, because I have quite a limited supply, and so we need to continue to have it brought out from the UK. I mean, to me, everyone should be eating Marmite, but I appreciate I might not be in the majority. Please feel free to contact your local Marks & Spencers to make that same point. I know. Well, ask them for it. Thank you.
Next questions, please. There is, yeah.
Hello, Your Excellency. Thank you very much for being such a great person and for being such a great ambassador. Like, hats off for you as a part of Czech NAFO. So, if I may have two questions. One, whether you feel some support from this unorganized group of doggos. And second one, this is about your much young advisors, whether you have some favorite ones already, and when will you say who those are? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That feels like I've planted a question somehow, but it's perfect. I mean, in terms of NAFO and others, just a huge fan. Love the work, and I think. Again, this sort of point about sort of openness and some of those changes that are happening at the moment, I think in the same way that the fight with Russia is happening on all fronts, including in the information space, I think the response to Russia can happen in all of those spaces. So not just people who are on the physical front line, but the rest of us as well, by continuing to keep Ukraine in mind, by not losing sight of what's at stake. So I think all of that, you know, those are amongst the reasons to be optimistic about everything that's happening. I mean, here in the Czech Republic, the Darek pro Putina kind of agenda, which is, you know, incredibly strong and enormous empathy and action that was demonstrated in solidarity. And I think that plus 500,000 Ukrainian refugees, many of whom have been very successfully integrated into the workplace and therefore contribute far more than they take. I think this is an enormous success, and there's much that this country can be proud of. Thank you for mentioning the young advisors. This is kind of a personal project, but it's something that we in the embassy, I think, really are excited about. And to explain it, so especially for those that haven't heard already, so I mean, essentially a couple of weeks ago, I put out a call and said, very conscious that I spend a lot of time talking about young people, but I wasn't spending very much time talking to young people. So rather than me pretending I understand what's on their minds, I wanted to find a way of actually interacting with them. So I was hoping to find 8, 9, maybe 10 young people who'd be willing to work with me for an hour or two each month for an online meeting, so it can be anywhere in the Czech Republic, and tell me what's on their minds. And that's really as simple as it is. So we put this call out. It runs until the 18th. So if you know anyone between the ages of 18 and 26, sorry, that doesn't mean that you're not young if you're over 26. It really, that's not the message. But we had to draw a line somewhere. So if you know people, please encourage them, because we genuinely, you know, I want to hear and I want to have some time interacting with a group like that. So we haven't gone through the final list yet. There's quite a lot of applications already, but I'm really excited to see what we can do with it.
I see many hands in the back, so please.
Hi. I think you're doing a wonderful job here. And I wonder if agenda and if you have opportunity. I hope you can hear me clearly.
No, best
Oh, sir. Oh, sorry. Not used to it. So I wonder if it is in your agenda and if you had any...
It doesn't work, it seems, so can we ask the technical support for
No?
some help, please? Yes. Now it will be okay?
I have no idea. So finally, I hope now, so if you had any opportunity and if it's any part of your agenda to connect with people here in science or medicine as well, and if you met any, thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. So science, yes, it is. It's part of the agenda, and it's actually a part of the agenda that's working really well. And it's one of those where if I spend a bit less time on it, it's not because it isn't important, it's because it's working really well, actually. Here in this country, you've got some brilliant world-class science being done. I think about the Inorganic Chemistry Institute, the many other bodies underneath the Academy of Science, and they have great cooperation with UK counterparts. We had the Vice-Chancellor, which is the Rector of Oxford University, over recently, and she was talking about how to even improve even further that cooperation. So I think there's lots that we can do there. There's some really interesting stuff that's happening that lies in front of us, I think, about what technological change, what developments in science mean for us as countries. And this is where you look at quantum computing, or especially artificial intelligence, and there are as many fears and risks as there are opportunities, and I think this is exactly the kind of thing that I hope we can do more and more together. You have some very good scientists in this country. Let's be honest, the student numbers have dropped post-Brexit of Czechs going into the UK, but they're starting to come back up again, and we're starting to find other ways, especially post-grad cooperation, to redress that. So thank you, it's a great question. Completely agree.
Mentioning technologies, do you use personally AI, or are you, do you know how it works?
Well, I definitely don't know how it works. Although
it was a bit simplified, but in your job, are you using it a bit?
So there's some really interesting developments. And we actually had someone come into the embassy recently, a Czech person working on artificial intelligence, to talk about how it could revolutionize the workplace, which was really exciting to hear about, and it definitely can. There's an annual report the Foreign Office produces about sort of the world ahead. And interesting, it's been coming out for many years, but this was the first time they'd used artificial intelligence as part of that process. And as a result, they consulted something like 750 million documents, an impossible number within human capacities, but their ability to use that. At the same time, most of what I read about artificial intelligence scares me. So it makes me genuinely worry about whether we yet have the maturity and the ability to use such powerful tools for the benefit of everyone. And I think the risks that it can exacerbate inequalities, or it can increase the amount of disinformation that we're all dealing with, I think that's the stuff that worries me. Because we need a few more Václav Havels in charge of things, and I don't think we have that many.
Are you worried about your job?
Am I worried about my job? I think it will change. I think it genuinely will change. The way it's been explained to me, or at least in terms that I can understand, is that it's not necessarily that AI is going to take your job, but someone who uses AI might take your job. So it is that ability to use AI that maybe is going to determine which of us are still around.
Isn't it just kind of changing the starting point of when your job will start in the future?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, huge numbers of questions, incredibly exciting, and who knows where we'll be even within a couple of years' time. But that's the rate of change that I think we're living through.
So let's take another question from the audience. Please, here in front or there in back. Everybody will ask, don't worry.
Okay. So I would like to ask, I have a question actually. Does the embassy support international integration of minorities, specifically Roma? If yes, how? And the second question, I know that you are building a team of young people. Are you planning to involve members of the Romani community to represent Romani youth in your team?
Thank you very much. Really, really important questions. Second one is easier. Yes. And one of the things that we're trying to do, especially with the youth advisors, is that we've reached out to partner organizations that we think will help us get into the areas that we might not normally reach. So Romea, for example, is a great partner for us, and so we've really encouraged them to try to find ways of encouraging applications from young Roma. We are supporting Roma amongst other minority rights here, but it's slightly different than in some places, because fundamentally it's about supporting what the institutions here themselves are doing. So it's not that the UK should be coming in and telling how it should be done. It's much more about, well, is there anything about our experience that we can share? So something that very practical. In the UK, Roma children are far more likely to be in mainstream schools, whereas here the number of Roma kids that are in special needs schools is way, way higher. We have been sharing some of our experiences about how we make that work, because it tends to deliver better outcomes if they're kept into mainstream schools, if people are allowed to be educated together. So just as a practical example, but we work with some great community groups here, and it's one of the highlights of my job.
Next question, please.
A question at the front here, maybe?
Was lady in the front wanted to ask a question. Please pass the mic.
Your Excellency, may I ask you about, did you visit the State Theatre here in Prague and the play about your queen's
the
audience Queen, written by Peter Morgan. Do you know him, Peter Morgan? And is it true that the best minister president for Queen was Winston Churchill?
So it's a great question. So sadly, I didn't get to see the play, although I will be at the National Theatre, I think, this weekend seeing Valmont, which I'm very much looking forward to. The Peter Morgan plays, all of his work around the Queen are incredible. So I think I would see everything that he has done, everything he's been involved with already. In terms of who was the best Prime Minister, Her Majesty had 17 Prime Ministers. Yes. And the first one was, as you say, Winston Churchill, which is kind of incredible. So she went from Winston Churchill to Liz Truss. And that blows my mind.
Yeah. Next question, please. There in the back. Thank you very much.
Hello. You mentioned earlier that UK...
I think maybe come closer. Yeah.
Is this better? Okay. You mentioned earlier that UK policy is to support equal marriage all over the world. Are there any other examples of such policies? Any climate stuff, for example?
Yeah, definitely. So climate action is another very concrete one of our priorities. We try to not just do the right thing at home, but to support others. So the UK has been through a huge transition. I think it's now the first G20 country to halve emissions, which is good, but there's an awful long way still to go. And I think, again, slightly in the spirit of concerns about AI, I think our ability to do the right thing in the long term is what worries me about, say, climate action. I keep recommending Walka Smloky, War with the Newts, to anyone who will read it, please, because I think it works for lots of things, not least for climate change, which is that we have a tendency not to take the long-term action that we need to, and to act in our short-term interest, and the result is newts in the Vltava or disaster on our doorstep. So I think that's another example of things that we're trying to do. I mean, gender equality as well, just as a general sort of theme that runs through everything that we're trying to do, because we think, we know actually the research is conclusive that societies which are more equal are more successful and more stable. But we do this hopefully not in a patronizing way or saying that we've got all the answers at home, because we really don't. We actually make many, many mistakes on these points back at home, and so it has to be a conversation, it has to be friend to friend.
I think we are heading slowly towards the end, but we have space for a few more questions. There is one, please.
Okay. Good evening, Your Majesty. Hello, Matt. Your Excellency,
you wish, right?
Nearly Majesty. I'm here on behalf of children of primary school second graders, the same age of your sons, probably. And I'm supposed to ask you, on behalf of them, what's your most favorite and the least favorite Czech meal? And the vice versa question, what would you ask them, or maybe which message would you pass on to teenagers of the Czech Republic, which unfortunately can't be your youth advisors because their age is below or not 18 yet? Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Favorite and not favorite? So, I mean, I have lots of favorites. I've really enjoyed it. I mean, there's nothing better to me than tartarak and a nice beer. This is perfect. I shouldn't be saying this to school children, actually, should I? Just the tartarak and a limonada that goes with it. It's not really it's not something I dislike, but I do have one slight kind of issue to raise, which is how to eat chlebíčky. And at what point it becomes so big that it's no longer a chlebíček? Because, I mean, I've received some that are like the size of plates, and I don't understand how that is anything Czech. I mean, I don't think, there's just practicalities that I have, so I do avoid those. In terms of a message for the kids, I mean, for one thing, this won't be the only time we run the youth advisors, so, hopefully if they wait, they will have an opportunity in the future. But I think it's, more than anything, just to continue to be curious and enthusiastic. We need their ideas and we need their energy, and it's interactions with young people that continue to make me optimistic. And in my experience, certainly, young people in this country are not apathetic. Sometimes frustrated, sometimes worried, but they're not apathetic, and they are actually, there's many reasons to be optimistic about them, and I imagine that's your experience as someone that works with them as well. Thank you.
More questions? No issues with knedlíky?
No complaints, no complaints.
Good evening. Earlier you've mentioned curiosity as kind of a good prerequisite for being a good diplomat, and I'm interested in, outside of your work life, what are your other curiosities, or kind of what are you interested in? For some people it might be history, for some people it might be astronomy or Legos or whatever. What is it for you that gets you going?
No, it's a good question. So I think that, I have a wonderful time trying to keep up with my kids, and that is absolutely the highlight of any time that I spend out of work, is trying to understand whether it's Minecraft or being told which words I'm not allowed to use, which was another conversation we had recently. Riz, apparently I'm not allowed to say that. And if you don't know what that is, it's the Oxford English Dictionary's new word of last year, so I'll leave you to discover that. But there's plenty to, just keep trying to keep up with them. And then, when I do get a bit of quiet time, both Martina and I are big fans of, kind of exploring and spending some time getting to see what this amazing city and this amazing country has to offer, because we've really only scratched on the surface. And that's a really exciting place to be.
Do we have here any more questions? There is one.
Thank you. Very specific question. What can we learn from the British experience of promoting active old age. There is a big campaign now in the Czech Republic to change the image of so-called old age pensioners, etc., who are unable to offer very much anymore. And yet in Britain, I think, there is a much greater of older people in community activities, but also in social services, promoting their activism or their active life. So is there anything we can learn from you, and how to access it? I happen to be working in that area, so I would very much appreciate some kind of information or suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a great question. Again, I wouldn't say certainly that we have all the answers, but it's been really something, particularly seeing my parents go through this process of sort of working and retiring, and then finding, rediscovering them this sort of new opportunities, and along with their friends. I think it's great to see how much better we're getting at talking about supporting and involving people. I think the effort to keep people moving and keep them active, or keep them active mentally as well, I think has been pretty successful, and I certainly would struggle to keep up with my parents when I go back and spend time with them, because their social life is better than mine, and they seem to be more active, and they seem to have much more going on. You'll know better than me what the situation is here, but I certainly feel as though I certainly see a lot of active older people here in the Czech Republic whenever I'm out walking or hiking or doing things. So I think there's probably a good example that you can set for us as well in that.
We can call it the last question, I think. Pardon. Yeah.
Thank you. It's working. I'm not a native Czech, but I've lived here over 20 years, and I'm just wondering your impression, since it seems like 80 to 90% of the questions you received tonight were from Czechs, which indicates an extremely high proportion, either a high proportion of questioning people or a high proportion in the audience of Czechs. Is this what you expected from the meeting, rather than having a lot of Brits who are coming and asking questions? Or are you pleased? What is your view? Because frankly, I'm quite surprised to see the huge attendance of Czech people who are here and who are questioning you. I'm just wondering what your view is on that.
So, I mean, I think the first thing is I'm just amazed anyone is here questioning me. So I had visions of sort of an empty room with a couple of colleagues from the embassy and a pretty painful night. But so I really do appreciate it, and lots of great questions. I'm not surprised in that we've had a brilliantly warm reception from Czech friends from the very start. So that doesn't surprise me. And it's interesting sometimes actually to talk to Czech people and mention that warm welcome, because I think the self-image can often be different. And actually the self-image is that maybe it's not going to be such a friendly place to come into. But that's not been my experience at all. It's been that people, whether it's in person, through social media, through different ways, people have been incredibly generous and interactive right from the very start. So, you know, it doesn't surprise me, but I don't take it for granted, and I really, really appreciate it.
And final question now. I can see there. Thank you.
Oh, just to prove there is another Brit here. I was actually prompted by the last question. First of all, thank you very much for tonight, and you're a great representative of our country. Thank you. Hello. I could obviously ask a question about whether you prefer Czech beer or British beer, but that would be a too simple one for you. I think a lot of emphasis tonight has been made on the attractions of this country, and as the last person spoke, sometimes I feel that we're not good at actually conveying how attractive the Czech Republic is to our fellow countrymen. Hello. which I think is a little disappointing. I know it's not particularly your remit, but do you have any views about how this amazing country, these fabulous people, how we can actually promote that further in Britain?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, you're right in the sense that it's not directly my job, but at the same time, it's kind of part of my job, I think, as well. And this is a partnership. This is a two-way street, and so I think we should be thinking just as much about how we explain the great things that this country has to offer, so that the relationship continues to grow in all the ways that we think it can. I speak to the ambassador in London pretty much every month. She and her team, I think, do a great job. At the moment, they're talking a lot about the legacy, for example, from the Second World War, of not just those that fought, but their children, and the way that they are continuing to contribute today. When I was in London a couple of weeks ago with your speaker, Markéta Pekara-Adamová, we launched a UK-Czech friendship group in our parliament, and what was really interesting was in that group of sort of 20 MPs, how many of them had some sort of connection already. One whose grandfather was from Ostrava, another whose adoptive parents had actually moved to the UK in the 60s. There's many of these stories, and I think that sort of helps, that sort of level of interaction. But yeah, I think it's maybe a question for our Czech friends is why they don't feel a little bit more confident in telling the story about this country. And maybe it's just that they like to keep it a secret, and I completely understand why. Because when something's this good, you kind of want to keep it to yourself. But I think maybe there's something about a little bit more confidence, including confidence internationally, that friends like us can maybe help a little bit with.
So let's work on that. And that's it for now. Thank you very much for your great questions. And especially thank you very much, Mr. Field, to be such a great guest. I hope you enjoyed the first edition of In Conversation With, and enjoy your evening. Thank you.
Thank you.